that takes a toll, right? Where what we're seeing from the report is that men who are, 18 to 34, a quarter of them were reporting feeling very lonely the previous day. And, this is not necessarily a new trend. Like in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness an epidemic. But the reason that really matters from a health perspective is that loneliness has an impact on health that can be equated to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There's very tangible health costs to being in this kind of negative mental state of isolation. And so we're seeing higher rates of that among younger people, even though they are more connected than ever with kind of like social media and this digital methods of connection. But those connections are not offering the same kind of emotional connection and authenticity that these in-person interactions do provide.
Hey, I'm Sheena Brevig, and welcome to Sib as a Human, where we explore the messy, complex, and beautiful experience of what it is to be a sibling to someone with disabilities, what we call being a Sib. In today's episode, we're doing something new. My guest, Dr. Pete Fisher, is joining me from the Movember Institute of Men's Health to talk about their latest research on men's mental health and the impacts of caregiving. In the last episode, Andrew shared about his mental health and his experience and spoke really highly of Movember, and we thought we'd bring someone on to share a little bit about what they do and what their research is finding. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Andrew's episode, I highly recommend going back and listening to that, and then come back to this one. In this conversation, Pete and I explore the common male experience of feeling like you need to be self-sufficient and therefore never ask for help. And we discover a surprising overlap of that characteristic showing up in Sibs of all genders. We talk about the gendered nature of caregiving, what the research shows, and how it impacts women more negatively than men. And, of course, the importance of community. Dr. Peter Fisher is a research fellow at the Movember Institute of Men's Health. He received his PhD in social psychology from UCLA and conducted research on approaches to motivate equitable behavior and attitude change from within privileged social groups, including ways to reframe traditional masculine norms. At Movember, Pete's work focuses on developing a new measure of healthy manhood and understanding ways to frame messages about health that are engaging to men. He has co-authored multiple Movember reports. His research has been published in well-respected journals, and he has presented his research at national and international psychology conferences. He also has experience consulting with entertainment companies on evidence-based ways to improve gender equity. That's actually how Pete and I first met. We were working on a training for the entertainment industry, talking about representation of men and masculinity in media and how that could be done in better ways to more positively impact society. I love this conversation with Dr. Fisher, and I hope you do too. Pete, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Sheena. It's really exciting to be here.
So part of why I reached out to you is because we had a guest on this podcast, Andrew, who, if you all haven't listened to that episode, you should go back and listen to it. But he really shared about his experience as a Sib, as a male Sib, and he spoke about his mental health journey, and he really spoke highly of this organization, Movember, as being a resource and an amazing space that he felt really supported him. I would love to have you first tell us a little bit about what Movember is and your role there.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a research fellow at the Movember Institute of Men's Health, which is kind of like our internal translational research group within Movember. But Movember itself is the world's largest men's health charity. It started in 2003, and since then we've raised over $1 billion for our causes in the men's health space. Our main kind of focus areas within men's health are prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and mental health and suicide prevention. Across those, we have tons of active projects, community organizations we've partnered with and funded, clinical trials we've funded in the cancer space. And what the Movember Institute, that was established about 2 years ago, has started to do now is kind of move more into the research and policy space to kind of build evidence and kind of advance the field. It's been a great journey landing here at a place where I'm able to kind of do, rigorous research that also has a translational component. So we're always thinking about how are we going to implement the takeaways from the research that we're finding and applying those to, our Movember community and to the world of men's health.
Amazing. Thank you. As you might guess, the Sib world is pretty female-centered, and there really aren't a lot of men present, but we know that male Sibs are out there. I'm kind of in this place of wanting to continue to understand male mental health better, Sib male mental health better. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what you know, at least through Movember and your research about how are men doing today.
the trends that we're seeing right now within the Movember Institute and kind of the field of men's health writ large, I will say that the Movember Institute just recently put out our big report called the U.S. Real Face of Men's Health Report back in October of last year. And that covered a lot of different kind of aspects of men's health, focusing on some of the biggest ones, including premature mortality. In the U.S., 53% of men are dying prematurely from preventable causes. And I should say that's also kind of where Movember is really firmly focused, is on the prevention and kind of early adoption and education aspects of health to kind of get that number down. And in terms of kind of the pressures that men are facing at a societal level, like a lot has changed. Like we're talking about mental health and the stigma around it more currently than has ever been true in our society. But men are still feeling these pressures. And part of that is that men are socialized to kind of repress emotions, to not really talk about them, or, anything that can kind of make them worry about being seen as weak, right? Like strength is such a hallmark of these kind of traditional ideas around masculinity. And a lot of young men are very prone to avoiding situations where they are seen as weak. And then, you add that up over time. And what that means is that men are never putting themselves in vulnerable positions. And so they're not engaging in conversations or joining spaces where they're able to have kind of that emotional connection. And that takes a toll, right? Where what we're seeing from the report is that men who are, 18 to 34, a quarter of them were reporting feeling very lonely the previous day. And, this is not necessarily a new trend. Like in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness an epidemic. But the reason that really matters from a health perspective is that, it's not just feeling alone. It's loneliness has an impact on health that can be equated to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There's very tangible health costs to being in this kind of negative mental state of isolation. And so we're seeing higher rates of that among younger people, even though they are more connected than ever with kind of like social media and this digital methods of connection. But those connections are not offering the same kind of emotional connection and authenticity that these in-person interactions do provide. And so, yeah, kind of a mixed landscape in terms of, well, we're seeing some very promising trends in terms of, the norms around what is acceptable to talk about for mental health kind of shifting, but still a lot of, loneliness and a lot of isolation, and men and young men kind of grappling with, staying true to themselves and getting the help they need and feeling healthy, but also navigating the kind of different societal stressors and pressures that may not always be pushing them towards those goals of health.
We did a survey that just went out to Sibs, as many Sibs as we could reach. And one of the big things that people reported was loneliness and isolation. The survey respondents were overwhelmingly female identifying, given the population we were working with. But I feel like the more I think about men and male Sibs, the more I see overlaps with just Sibs in general and the Sib experience. I think that loneliness, that isolation, that kind of I don't know where to turn to talk about these things seems to be a theme that we're seeing with Sibs, which is part of why we're doing this podcast. We're trying to create a space so we can talk about these things.
Yeah.
And additionally, the hyper independence that Sibs tend to learn, and this feeling of I got to do it by myself. I got to do it on my own. I have to figure everything out kind of for myself and by myself. I feel like that's also like what men end up picking up socially. Can you maybe speak to that piece of things?
Yes, absolutely. So there's another pillar of kind of this traditional masculine norm, traditional ideas around masculinity is self-reliance. So not needing to depend on others for anything. And that influences a lot of different domains of health, right? Like think about help seeking or going to the doctor. Like all of a sudden that is seen as something that is going against this norm of self-reliance, of being able to kind of handle everything on your own. Same with kind of emotional connection and emotional regulation, where, if you're trained and told from a young age that, man up, like boys don't cry, and you're having emotions, you're going through a breakup, you're getting bad news at work, just sitting with that, ruminating on it and like holding it in is not going to be conducive to your mental health, right? Like the way that we know is the best to kind of process these things is to share with others, talk about it, talk to a therapist, for example. And those are still kind of seen as admissions of weakness or violations of these norms of traditional masculinity of, oh, if I'm doing this, I'm not completely self-reliant. So have not lived up to this ideal that I've been socialized to believe. Those narratives are changing, absolutely. And I think there's more and more people in general in society talking about how, asking for help takes strength, being vulnerable with your emotions takes strength. And so, yeah, I think this conversation is part of that, right? Like the more that is put out there and that is seen as something where it's like, I can, express myself and still feel secure in my identity as a man, that's like the progress that we want to be making. And I think this actually ties into something. One of the really cool aspects of the report was we were diving into this phenomenon that we call the perception gap, which is this idea that a lot of men tend to overestimate the degree to which other men are endorsing these very traditional ideas around masculinity when they themselves are saying like, oh, I think most guys don't do this, but I want to do it, but I don't because most guys do. But if you ask a room of 10 men about this, like 9 of them are going to say, I do this, but I don't think other guys do. So there's this misperception where men want to be doing these things that maybe aren't seen as traditionally masculine, like having emotional conversations, seeking help early when they're having, physical health issues. But they're not because there's this misperception. And so that's something at Movember that we're prioritizing as an area of research and trying to understand kind of what is driving this misperception. And that's like a broader psychological phenomenon at the social norms level. It's like pretty common for people to have a misperception on that. But when we're looking specifically at men's health and men's like expectations around what they think others should think they should be doing, that's like especially kind of magnified.
Wow, it's really interesting. I know that in the Real Face of Men's report, you all did some research on caregivers. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what you found or what the findings were, given you also looked across genders, correct?
Yes. So we looked at caregivers of men, but we looked at it broken out by women and men caregivers. It's around 2,100 caregivers, around 60% of them identified as women. And we found some really interesting things, which is caregiving is not kind of this clear-cut thing where it's either a burden or it's a positive, and there's a very gendered experience of it. And so one of those experiences is that women caregivers tend to provide care in multiple ways, in multiple kind of aspects of care, right? Whether it's emotional support or logistics and scheduling and planning on behalf of the person they're caring for. Whereas men, it's a lot more instrumental in terms of their support. It's like driving people and doing physical labor on their behalf. But women are very involved in the care that they provide. And this takes a toll. In the data that what we were seeing is that women report net negative outcomes on 8 of 9 areas of life that we surveyed. And these are things like not having as much time, not feeling like they can advance in their career, not having energy, and feeling like more emotionally exhausted. Whereas men only reported net negative on 1 out of those 9 outcomes, which was impact on time. And so very different experience, which is kind of reflected in the care that women are providing. They're providing care in multiple domains across different levels. It's going to take more out of them. But it's not just this burden aspect. There's certainly a toll, but there's also a lot of positives that we're seeing for caregivers of men, both for women and men. We found that over 80% agreed that caregiving led to more quality time together. Over 80% said it brought them closer to the person they're providing care for. As well as 82% noting that it increased communication. It led to better communication. So caregiving is like this very interesting phenomenon where it's something that is like deeply intimate and there's a lot of connection, and it can actually open doors in that relationship that people might not have otherwise kind of gone through. But at the same time, it can take a toll. And so there's a really important need to understand and kind of give grace for caregivers, especially informal caregivers, right? People who are not being paid to do this. These are often, Sibs or family members or, loved ones. And so it's a very complex picture, nuanced picture, and it's not purely bad or good. And so what we're trying to do in the report is kind of just better break out kind of how this is the experience of caregiving for men can be experienced differently depending on gender. But there are universal positives as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting because my experience of being in Sib spaces before or kind of earlier on when I was first learning about this identity and this community was that we were only talking about the positive things. And I felt kind of like an imposter in those spaces because I was like, yes, I do believe, I have this connection with my sibling and it's made me a more empathetic person and all these things that research does show. And also, there's the flip side of things. And so it's really interesting to hear that you all found that, especially for women, 8 out of 9 areas, they were experiencing net negative impacts.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I want to focus on the negative either, but it's validating. There's a part of hearing that's validating, that's like, oh yeah, this is hard. And we as people give a lot. We as women give a lot. Sibs give a lot. I'm curious about male Sibs out there listening to this who might maybe identify more with how the women reported in that survey, because, our last guest, Andrew, he talked about identifying with this identity of the eldest daughter. And he was like, honestly, as that phrase has kind of come more into the mainstream, it's been the thing that's easiest to describe myself. And I'm like, that's so fascinating, right? Because he's a man and also a caregiver in these ways that are against kind of society's ideas of men and their experiences.
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of point. And I think it really underscores the nuance here. There's a really interesting kind of dichotomy between, men are socialized to see themselves as providers and providing for others, especially family members and loved ones, as like a really core part of like what defines you as a man, what a successful man has to be able to provide. And yet when we take that same lens and apply it to caregiving, it's seen as kind of feminine coded or not masculine, even though it's ultimately you're providing care, right? Like it's a very,
right.
You're supporting somebody in a very almost more direct way than if you're financially supporting them, right? So it's a really interesting tightrope of like something that, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for kind of reframing caregiving to align more kind of with these masculine expectations, where it's more just kind of trying to bring men into this idea that this is just another way to provide for somebody in your life, that, in a very real way, in a very tangible way, that, from our data shows that it can actually deepen that relationship. And I think, and we see it again, in the breakdown across professions that are more caregiving aligned, like nursing, for example, is heavily, female. But so there's very much a gendered perception of this work, even though in reality, it actually does align with some of these tenets of like more traditional masculinity. Another piece from the caregiving data in our report is that, most men who are caregivers are caregiving for people who are older than them, usually a family member. And that's very different from kind of caring for someone who's younger and maybe disabled and kind of in a different situation. And so I think there's dynamics there that kind of change that. Whereas women caregivers tended to, it was older people, it was younger people, it was kind of everybody. And so there's like a broader array of kind of the types of care and the relationship dynamics therein. And so that can also kind of influence and shape what people are getting out of it, how much it's taking out of them. There's so much in this idea, and you touched on this, of like reframing strength as something that requires multiple inputs. And it's not just physical strength. It's not just being self-reliant. Strength can be, showing up for somebody in a way that is really helpful to them. And in that way, I think caregiving takes a lot of strength. And I think it aligns with these ideas of masculinity in a broad sense, right? Of like being somebody who's dependable, who can help others and support them when they need to without expecting anything in return necessarily. And so I think there's very much aspects of caregiving that are aligned with even the most kind of traditional understandings of masculinity. Caregiving is kind of like a more natural fit, I think, with that ethos as well.
I love that framing. It's funny. This is the first time I've ever thought of some of the traits that I hear a lot of female Sibs talking about through this kind of masculine lens of like, I got to do it by myself. I'm going to have to take care of everyone. I'm going to have to provide.
In the report we touched on, we highlighted a bunch of different organizations and federal and state policy ideas that could address some of these kind of health gaps that we highlighted in the report. And one of the themes across these kind of areas was building community. And, that's been Movember's MO since day one. Movember was founded by a group of friends who just like to meet up and chat in the pub and in Australia. And, growing mustaches was just a way to kind of make fun of each other and also raise awareness around men's health. And so at its core, Movember is really built on that community. And a lot of the, organizations and partners that we have have are focused on developing communities where their goals are to create spaces to have conversations, to have training, have education that is allowing men to get the skills they need to have better mental health. And just better health overall, and feeling more connected is really just such a fundamental, like psychologically feeling like you belong in a group and that the group has your best interests in mind and that you can be your authentic self there. Those are such fundamental things that I think a lot of men, especially young men right now, are looking for. And a lot of them are looking for it online, right? But it really all comes down to, connection and community and having a space where men feel seen and like that they can like bring their full selves and take risks when it comes to getting out of the like stereotypes about what it means to be a man and like checking in with a friend or sharing something about an uncertainty that they've had, and feeling like that's well received and that that's then internalized. And then that's like one small step on their health journeys.
That's so fantastic. What would you want to say to male sibs out there, or those of us who have male sibs in our lives that we love and care about and want to support?
Yeah, I mean, just that you're not alone and, you have friends and family who will support you if you let them. And I think the one call to action that I would have is, send a text to one guy in your life just saying like, hey, how's it going? And that can be enough. To have somebody check in on you is the starting of building that connection. And every time you do that, it's an opportunity for them to then kind of be like, oh, you know what? I am going through it right now. And I would like to share about that. Because for a lot of men, that's not their first reaction is to like, I'm going through it. Let me be the one to reach out. Sometimes it helps to be the ones checking in on them. And so that's, for mental health, physical health, anything, especially for Sibs and other caregivers, like people who we know are taking on the work of this informal caregiving on top of their, professional or student responsibilities. Like they're definitely the ones we need to be checking in on, right? And making sure that they're all good. If people feel like they're concerned about how to have that like check-in conversation, Movember has created a tool called the ALEC method for checking in and having conversations, particularly with guys. But ALEC stands for ask, listen, encourage action, and check in. And if you just Google it, there's a great website where it has like a little bit of training and a little bit of explanation for how each of those steps should go. But yeah, the baseline behavior is really just getting comfortable with checking in and being checked in on. My advice for guys out there is to like, don't put up those walls. Don't retreat to just listening to podcasts or going online when you're going through something. Be open, be proactive in kind of taking advantage of the social networks you have. I think a lot of men are under the misperception that when they reach out for others, it feels like it will be a burden. When in reality, it's like the highest compliment a friend can receive is somebody coming to them with an issue that they're going through that they can help them with. And it really is validating for the people who are asked to kind of help when in those check-in type situations. And so don't let that be a barrier for you to reach out.
I needed to hear that myself too. Thank you. It can be an honor to be reached out to. And I think all of us Sibs need to remember that, because one of the big things we also saw was that Sibs really struggle to ask for help. And that's across all genders.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough. I think the other thing about checking in, and I'll try to condense all of the like knowledge on the ALEC method website into like one point here, but it's really like when you're checking in with somebody, the goal is to not solve their problem right away. The goal is to create a space where you can listen and not pass judgment. That's the other piece that's really important. Because if somebody reaches out and you are talking with them and you're like, oh, that's awful. How'd you do that? It's like, that's not really helping them in that situation.
Right.
And so it's important to create a space where they can talk through it. Sometimes them just putting words to what has happened is a way of processing. And so being there and supporting them and listening and asking questions, leading with curiosity and being like, oh, like, what are you going to do next? Like prompting them to be the ones to take action is really important. And I think a lot of guys struggle with this of like, you're feeling this way, just do this, and like that can be very tempting. Spending the time just sitting with it for a moment rather than jumping straight into like problem solving, that can actually be kind of the conversation that they need to have.
As I'm hearing you talk about this, I feel like this is totally applicable for parents too, right? Parents of kids in general, but especially Sibs, if they're thinking about, how is my other kid doing? How's my non-disabled kid doing? And to open up the space to have those conversations and have their kid share without immediately trying to make them feel better.
It is counterintuitive, right? Where it's like kind of goes against everything you want to do in that moment, but it's good to get practice in kind of just sitting with it and helping people process things, and yeah, it's definitely a skill. And that's why Movember has like built resources around this to kind of help people, on these journeys for how these conversations go. But it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, it's like important, just the act of checking in itself and like having the conversation can be helpful. I would say like to not worry about getting every single talking point or every little thing right. Giving yourself grace is also important in that too, because, that's part of being a friend is like being vulnerable and like accepting, what is given, even if it isn't, polished and perfect every time.
Yeah. And part of being human.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Well, thank you so, so much for having this conversation with me. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Just, the U.S. Real Face of Men's Health Report is available on the Movember website. If you want to stay up to date with the latest kind of Movember research coming out of the Movember Institute of Men's Health, we're on Substack, movember.substack.com, at Movember on all the socials. And yeah, we're not just, the fun mustache company. We're doing real big, impactful programmatic work all over the world.
You're fun and impactful.
There you go. We're having fun doing good.
Hey, there it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so, so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Sib as a Human. Please subscribe, like, rate, and comment to let us know what resonated with you. And the more engagement we have from listeners, the more we can bring to you all as well. Connect with us on Instagram at Sib as a Human and subscribe to our Substack to be the first to know when new episodes, articles, and resources drop. All of these links are also in our show notes. We are currently making this show with very little funding, so if you feel so inclined, we have a donation page if you want to support Sibs and this project. If you have ideas or other ways that we can bring this podcast and community to more people, please email us at sibasahuman@gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time. And until then, be gentle with yourself.